Okay, so I divided this into four main modules or four main topics. The first topic or the first module will be hosting web applications in the Azure platform. As we know, uh, talking about the cloud technology, we have three types of deployment models using the software as a service, the platform as a service, and the infrastructure as a service. This time we're going to focus into using the platform as a service that is very popular now. And for this specific topic, hosting web applications in the Azure platform, we have the technology of Azure that offer us to in this case, the product is the Web Apps feature, the Azure Web Apps Overview. This is a simple, scalable hosting for websites in Windows Azure with the following benefits that provides a quick way to host your web application in the cloud, allow us to scale our web application without being required to redesign for scalability. It is fully integration with Visual Studio 2, and it provides for us an open platform for many different programming languages. As we know, the difference between the platform as a service and the infrastructure as a service is that in this case, using the platform as a service or the web apps feature, we do not need to take care of the infrastructure in the back. We don't need to manage an operating system. We don't need to apply any patches. We don't need to take care of any of the virtual machines or something like that. We are just going to taking care of the how or which instance we are going to select when we create our web application instance in Azure. So here we are going to see a table in this slide that this is the options that we have to when we select an application service plan. A web application instance is an independent resource in Azure, and an application service plan, it's another resource, but these two resources are very linked together because the application service plan it is basically the resources that you are going to allocate to your web application instance. So you can create an application service plan at the first time without deploying an application instance yet. But you can deploy a web application instance without selecting an application service plan. And we are going to see the difference of these two different resources. And for example, we can take a look at this table and we can see that there is options from the free application service plan. Is there a dial number having issues with audio from website? Okay. Shannon, do you know if we have some number to dial? No audio, you can't hear me, guys? Okay, I'm hearing you fine, so that should be it from some of the guys. I can hear you, okay. Okay, guys, let me...
I'm reaching out for support right now.
Oh, okay. So if there's a number, Shannon, can you just put it in the chat box, please?
Yeah, as soon as I get that, I'll put it in.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, so let's continue, guys, because we just have a very short time. So I was telling you about the differences of the pricing tiers, and we can start from the free, but there is some limitations on it, like the disk space and the amount of time that we can use the free instance or the free service plan. That the limitation is that you can use just 1 hour per day, but it is a good idea, or it's a good option if you want to start testing to move your web applications to the cloud, for example. Then you can very quickly scale up to a different pricing tier and receive more resources, like the ones that we can see, like receiving an SLA, for example, configuring an auto scale condition, geo-distributed deployment to distribute your web applications to multiple regions at the same time, is applying like a custom domains from the share pricing plan, for example, applying SSL certificates for security, and like configured automated backups per day for your web application, and also its dependencies, because maybe you're now using a database or something. The automated backup can take care of that backups of your database if your application has some dependencies like a database. Here we are going to see a very quick demonstration about creating a web app. I already have a subscription of Azure here. So talking about the web applications here, the product that we are talking about is the application services. Very common, you're going to see this product of this service as web apps. It is the same, but in the official documentation you will find these two different terminologies. A web app or an application service, but it's the same there. Okay, still no audio. Is there a dialing up? Okay, Shannon is helping me about the number to dial, so when it finds the number, it will paste it in the... Shannon is going to paste. It's going to paste the number in the chat box quick. So let me just continue with this presentation. And I was talking about a demo about creating a web application here. So in this case, application services or web apps, you're going to find in the documentation. It is the same terminology. It is the same definition. I will provide a number for the support shortly. Okay. So thank you, Shannon. I'm just going to go back to my Azure subscription here, and I'm going to click on application services. So here I don't have any application instance yet, so we can just quickly click on add, and that will open for us this blade. This is called a blade in Azure. So we have multiple options here. The first option is just creating an empty instance. If we already have a web application and we want to move it to the cloud, or to put it into the cloud, or hosting in the cloud, we can choose this first option. But maybe we want to use ready-to-use software that we can put it into our own subscription. Like for example, this WordPress on Linux, we can just deploy this as a web application in our subscription to be able to use it into our organization. So in this case, we don't need to take care even about the application itself, because the application is already packed and it is taken from the marketplace. This blade represents the Azure marketplace, where we can find multiple options to pick just multiple ready-to-use software images that we can host it into our own web application instance. But let's say that we want to just deploy a web application instance, an empty one, and maybe we can just later push the code that represents our web application. So in this case, we are building our infrastructure to just be able to host our custom web application here. So if we click on the first option with web app, and we can read a brief description of what is a web application instance here. If we scroll down, we can click on create, and that will open for us the blade and the journeys for creating or deploying our first web application instance. With a web application instance, we are receiving like a default URL. The custom domain that Azure give us is the azurewebsites.net. So basically we need to name our application instance here. The name needs to be unique globally here, so we just need to, for example, I'm going to provide webinar Azure, and if you see the green check after you provide the name, that means that name it's available. It's not already taken from another person or company, so you can just configure this. But depending on your pricing tier, you can later replace this for your custom domain if you want. But by the first time, you will receive a custom default domain that comes from the Azure. Okay, that is the name for the, or that is the number for the contacting support. Please, for the ones that have problems with the audio. And let's say that I want to name it webinar Azure, that Azure website net. The next option will be to select a subscription here. You just need to have a valid subscription. In my case, I have multiple ones, but I only have 2 ones that are valid subscription. So I'm just going to leave the default one. And because this is a resource in Azure, you need to select or create a new resource group. A resource group is for logical allocation of your resources. Anything that you deploy in Azure, it is called a resource. So here, this webinar Azure will be a resource that represents a web app instance for me. So because we are deploying a resource here, we need to provide a resource group for that. So Azure is trying to automatically create a new resource group in this deployment, and it's trying to name it the same as my application name. But you can change it. You can change it for a different name, and that name needs to be unique in your subscription scope. Or if you already have multiple resource groups, you can switch to use an existing, and you are going to select the different resource group that you are managing. So in this case, let me just create a new and leave the default name for that. Here, as I told you before, because we are talking about platform as a service here, we don't need to take care of their resources or the whole configuration of the web of the virtual machine that is going to host our web application. We just need to pick which operating system we want to use. In this case, we have the options to use Windows or to use Linux to host our web application here. Let's say that I just want to use Windows operating system. So this is basically going to deploy an IIS website inside a server into a data center, and that data center will be, I need to pick a location for that. The location represents where that data center is, the real infrastructure is running, but that option comes in the application service plan. So let's say that I'm going to use Windows as an operating system, and I'm going to use code just to publish my custom web application. The next option will be to select the application service plan. Remember that the application service plan, it's a separated resource, and it's the one that comes with the resources to be able to run our web application instance. So in this case, we have the options to create a new custom one, to pick from the list of the application service plans that we have in the options. I need to name it because it is another or separated resource. So I'm just going to try to name it the same name of my web app, webinar Azure. And if you see the green check, that name is correct. So here we are going to pick the location. The best practice here, talking about the location, is select the location as close as possible to your real needs if you are deploying this for your own consumption or for your company consumption. And then you need to pick your the closest location to you, because there can be a latency above if you pick a different location that it's 1,000 miles away from you. For example, if I just pick the South Central Asia, and if I am in North America, maybe I will find some performance issues because of that, because my web applications will be hosted into a Southeast Asia in a data center. So each time that I'm trying to access that specific web application, I'm going through that data center. So in this case, let me just pick the West US too, and from the pricing tier, we can click on that option and we can see all the options for the application service plan, and we can see just the included features and the included hardware that comes from that. Basically, we have 3 tabs with different pricing tiers that we can select from here. The development and testing are like you are going to find the F1, that it's the free one, but you only have 60 minutes per day of compute for that. But you are not going to pay anything by using this. It is a good way to start. It is a good way to practice or to test your web application. After you use that, you always have the options to increase the size or to select a different pricing tier, and just allocate the included features that come. Like, for example, if I just switch to production one, you will find that you can apply custom domains and SSL certificates. You can enable an auto-scale condition. An auto-scale condition will automatically sensing the performance of your web app instance, and based on the conditions, on some metrics that you can select, that you can customize. For example, the average of CPU usage for your web app instance, if surpasses the 60 or 70%, you can configure the auto scale when that conditions met, create 1, 2, or more instances automatically without your intervention. So this is a good feature if you are on production, like in this tab named production one. There's another feature called staging slots. You can manage all your versions or your updates of your custom web application. Instead of managing just always updating to the production slot, you can create multiple ones, and you have like an isolated web application instance, and you can deploy that to a different staging slot or different update slot. And once that you already have your 2, 3, or more versions, you can test it without affecting your production one. Once you apply the test and you are okay with the changes, you can swap the stagings. You can swap the slots, and you can move the ones that you test that you have into a staging slot to the production without experiencing downtime doing that. So depending on the pricing tier, you have the production one up to 5, but if you move to a different one, you can have up to 20 or something like that, depending on the pricing tier that you can configure daily backups for your web application instance and its dependencies, and you can apply traffic manager. If you are planning to distribute your web application to multiple locations, it would be a good idea to deploy also a traffic manager profiles. The traffic manager profiles will catch in the content of your web application instance, and it's going to, all the profiles that you deploy is going to serve the closest clients that you have that it's requesting the access to your web application instance. So your end users will we will find like a varied experience if you know that you will have multiple users across the globe. You can combine deploying multiple web application instances with traffic manager profiles, and the traffic manager profile will take care of the traffic to the closest endpoint to the client's request. let me just take a look. It's traffic manager like a load balancer. Yes, it is like a load balancer, but it works just in DNS. So it's just going depending on the traffic manager profiles that you have distributed, and depending the request of your clients is going to detect, okay, what is the closest one to the location of the client, and is going to send the traffic to that. But you still need to have multiple instances in that specific region. So you need to design that first, but it will work like a load balancer for your web application instance. Okay, so the isolated, it's different approach. With this, you will receive a dedicated instance. In this case, you are going to share the infrastructure in the back. In this case, you need to, when you pick the isolated, you are like building your own infrastructure just for you. You are not going to share it with anyone. That is for you, and that is why the isolated one takes like an hour to finish the deployment the first time, because it's like you are building your own infrastructure for you, and once you have your isolated web application instance, you can start hosting your multiple web application instances there. In this case, you will find a single tenant system just for you, an isolated network for you too. You can combine this isolated network to have like a hybrid connectivity, like configuring VPN tunnels, all the stuff that comes with an isolated network. You can configure it to your private web application instance in the isolated. You will have a private IPP access, application service environment. This is changed the name. You're still using the application services, but when you pick the isolated, you are using the application service environment, and you will have an internal load balancing feature there. You can scale up to more number of instances that you can see up to 100 instances, and you still have the option for deploying a traffic manager. You can see the estimated monthly cost. In my case, I'm located in Mexico. That is why you can see in the prices, the estimated prices, that it's in Mexican peso. It is not on US, so don't be scared about the numbers here. You should see a different currency there when you are using your own subscription. And I just create the subscription in Mexico, so that is why I'm receiving this. If you have your own subscription, you should see in your local currency there. So let's say that I just want to use the production one, and I'm going to pick the S1. I will receive 1.75 gigabytes of memory. For testing, it's okay. A series compute equivalent. This means that it's going to use in the real infrastructure in the data centers an A series computer. If you are already familiar with Azure, when you deploy a virtual machine, instead of configuring or customizing how many CPUs, how many the amount of memory of RAM memory, you are going to pick from different virtual machine sizes. So, and the sizes are arranged by letters and numbers. So A, B, C's, and D's, and A1, A2, A3. So in this case, the A series represents that it's going to use an A series of a virtual machine, and in the real infrastructure is going to use that virtual machine to host your web application. So let me just click on apply and finish the configuration for the application service plan, and finally we can just click quickly on create, and this will create our first web application. In this case, this same deployment will create two resources at the same time. The first one will be the application service, that it's the webinar Azure or my web app, and the second one will be the application service plan. Once that you have your first application service plan, I can create a second web application instance and use the same application service plan if I'm trying to save on cost, because the pricing tier is the one that I'm going to pay for. And when I create a second web application instance, and if I pick the same application service plan, I'm telling Azure that I'm going to host those 2 or 3 or more web application instances using the same application service plan. So I'm paying the same price for hosting multiple web apps, but just make sure that that will not affect the performance of your web application instance, that you select the right size for you, and because you are using the same resources for that. Okay, now someone raised his hand. Is traffic okay? And hands up. Hands up. Okay. Well, let's continue that. Validation successful. And deployment succeeded. We can just click on go to the resource, and we should be able to see the overview blade for our first web application instance. And here on the overview blade we can see the URL that we create for that. If I click on that, I should be able to just open my instance by the first time, and I'm receiving a message that my application service app is up and running, but I don't have any content yet, but it's ready to just push a custom web application to my application service app. So as I told you before, there is an integration with Visual Studio. So if I'm trying to use Visual Studio, for example, to create a new project here, I should be able to link my subscription with my Visual Studio application. So in this case, I can just, for example, use an ASP core web application. For example, I could click on OK, and that will open a new project for me here. I can just select a simple web application template there, and I should be able to just push some content to my web application instance that I just select. So in this case, I can just click on publish here and publish your application to Azure or another host. I can click on start, and you can see here the options here. Application service, I want to publish to an application service, the one that I just recently created. You have the options to create a new from here without accessing the portal, the Azure portal. You can just use this option to create a new application service and push the content in the same deployment or with this same wizard. So I'm going to select an existing because I know that I already have one. So I can click on publish, and you can see that this is my personal account, and in that personal account I have my Azure subscription. So in this case, I can just, if you have a different one, you can click on add an account, and you will be prompted from authentication. Once you are authenticated, you should be able to retrieve the information of your Azure subscription. So for example, I have 2 valid subscriptions, and the first one I don't have any resource group yet, but in the second one I do, and it's the one that I just created in the deployment, and the webinar Azure is the name of the application service. So I can click on OK, and it's preparing the profile, and now Visual Studio knows where to point to upload or to push the content of my custom web application to my application instance. We can see here that the site URL is this one, and it's trying to upload the content. Once that it finishes, it will try to automatically load the page by the first time, and we should be able to see that instead of the blue page that we received like this one, after it finishes, I can just try to refresh, and I should be able to open the new template or the new content that I just update, and it's trying to open it again. By the first time, it's going to take like a minute or something to just be able to refresh the content and all that stuff. We can just leave. Okay, now it's responding me, and you can see the difference. This is the old one, the one that it's empty, and I open it with the Chrome, and the other one opens automatically or try to open automatically using the Internet Explorer. So if I try to refresh this, I should be able to see the new version of the web template that I just provide. So with those steps, you can just quickly, if you already have your web applications, you can just point it, you can combine or link your Azure subscription to your Visual Studio application, or maybe a different IDE. If there is some integration with Azure, you can use the web deploy method to push the content for that. You can use also FTP. There's multiple options that you have to push some content to your web application instance. So in this case, because we are talking about the Microsoft, there is like a native integration from the Visual Studio 2015 that comes with that integration. 2017 comes with more integration. You can just address the same, and you can just deploy or create your web application instances just using Visual Studio without the need to use the portal and log in by the first time, create the instances, and then change to the Visual Studio application and just push the content. You can use just a Visual Studio application for that. So let me just change or switch to a different. This represents the application service plans. You can have a single application service plan, and you can host multiple websites at the same time. You are paying the same price because you are sharing the same application service plan. You just need to make sure that you are not facing performance issues by doing that, because you are using the same resources to host these application services. But you can combine with the auto-scale conditions to increase the resources for your application service plan if you want to keep managing that way, or you have the option to create a single web applications instance with a single application service plan. But in that case, you are paying for individuals application service plan, and you will have like an isolated, just a single application service plan to a single web application instance. So you don't have, or you will not face the troubles of the performance because you are using multiple web apps using the same resources. Okay, so application service plan are required parameter when creating a new web application instance. You can choose to add a new web app to an existing plan, or you can also define a new application service plan as part of creating a new web app too. You can apply a standard domain. This is the standard domain that you will receive by default from Azure, but you can, depending on your pricing tier, you can just change that to use your custom domain. But this involves managing the A and C name records with your registrar. You can do that. The same for scalability and performance. You can scale up. This is changing the pricing tier. Maybe you start with the free, but you can change it to share, basic, standard, or even the premium if you want to receive more resources or increasing the power of your web application. Scale out. This means changing the instance count. By default, you will create just a single instance, but you can just increase to, you can do it manually to up to 10 or up to the maximum allowable instance counts depending on the pricing tier that you select. Or you can combine it with the out of scale condition, and you can just set the rules or the maximum or minimum instances that you want to have it, because your web app can create more instances, or you can combine it with delete some instances when you don't need it, based on the same metrics, based on the CPU usage, for example, because maybe you don't just want to just creating more and more instances, and you are going to pay more for that. You can combine that, automatically sensing when there is low performance or when it's low utilization of the CPU, decrease the sizes of it, decrease the instances of your web application, so you can return to your original value and try to save the cost by doing that. You can have multiple conditions, and you can combine that with notifications, with alerts. You can have an auto scale condition, and maybe you want to get notified each time that it changes because of that, so you can just combine that to auto-scale automatically and also notify me. Send me an SMS, send me an email, or maybe a combination with an automated tool or automated job, for example, like a webhook or something like that. And each time that the auto-scale condition triggers, you can combine that to receive a message, send an email, send an SMS, and you will get notified each time that something is happening, even if it's automated into your web application. Configure alerts, triggers, you're going to configure triggers and you're going to configure actions too. The triggers is the condition that will run the actions, and the actions can be send email notifications, call a webhook, start execution of an Azure runbook, or maybe changing the pricing tier or increase the count of the instances. Okay, let's change into the module 2, storing unstructured data in Azure. So in this case, in module 2 and 3, we're going to talk about the storage, another form of the platform as a service or PaaS. About the storage, this allows us to store record files and simple records in a flexible, managed, and scalable solution. So in this case, we can use the storage for multi-purpose. There is basically two types of storage that we can deploy here. A general purpose. The general purpose will give us 4 main types of services that we can see here. Blob storage is the first one, table storage, queue storage, and file storage. So when we pick a general purpose, we are receiving all these 4 services: blob storage, table storage, queue storage, and file storage. Let's take a quick overview of each of these individual services. The blob storage is best used for example, hosting BHD files. If you already have virtual machines in your organization and you want to move on those virtual machines to the cloud or to an Azure subscription, you can start by creating a storage account and starting into a blob storage. That the blob storage is best designed for hosting the BHDs. Start to upload all those BHDs and hosting those VHDs from there, and then you can recreate the VHDs directly in the cloud. There is some other techniques that you can use to move your virtual machines that in some cases can be a best way to move your virtual machines, but in this case we are focusing about the storage. So in this case, a blob storage is for hosting VHD disk. There is a type of blob that it is best designed for hosting media files like images and also videos. And there is a type of blob storage that is very common use for logging purposes. So you will find 3 types of blobs talking about this individual blob storage service. In a storage account, we can see a single resource, but when we pick a general purpose, we are going to see these 4 services into a single storage account, into a single resource, and these services are isolated from each other. So at the blob level, you can just create multiple blobs, and you can create all those blobs using the 3 options that you have for the 3 types of blobs. And that service does not have anything to do with the other services, because you are receiving an endpoint for each of the individual services. There is an endpoint for the blob from your storage account, and there is another endpoint for the table storage, and there is another for the queue, and there is another for the file storage. So each time that you using a single storage account, you can use it for multi-purpose, and each time that you are trying to use it, okay, now this time I want to upload some file storage there, or I want to upload some files and folders, so you can point it to the endpoint of the file storage, and you are not going to mess with the blob, with the tables, and with the queues. But using a general purpose, you are sharing the maximum space for a single storage account is up to 500 terabytes at this point in time. So you are sharing that space between these 4 services. That is the only thing that you are sharing, the maximum allocation or the maximum space for a single storage account. If you need more space, then you can create a second one or a third one or multiple one. There's no limitations on how many storage accounts you are going to deploy, and you have up to 500 terabytes per storage account. In the events that you want to allocate more space to a single storage account, then you can request a ticket into the Azure portal, and they can increase the maximum size for you. But in this case, if you are okay with that, or if you want to allocate more space, you can just create a second one without requesting a ticket in the Azure portal. Here we can see general purpose version 2 or version 1. Those are basically the same. The version 2 is the most updated, and we will find a very small modification or very small difference between the V1 and the V2. And there is also just blob storage. When you just pick or try to deploy a storage account, when you pick just blob storage, that means that you are going to use that blob storage basically for hosting BHD disk. So this blob storage is just designed for that, for hosting BHD disk, and you will not find the file storage, the queue storage, and the table storage, just the blob storage, just one service. That's an option that you will find in the Azure portal. So here you can find the differences between those. For supported services, you will have the 4 main services in the version 1 and version 2 general purpose. For blob storage, just blob. You can use blob blobs and append blobs. You will find 2 types of blobs there, and 3 ones when you pick the general purpose. Supported performance tiers, standard and premium for the general purpose, and just standard for blobs. This basically means when you pick a standard, you are going to use HD disks or magnetic drives in the real infrastructure, and from the premium, you are going to use SSDs or solid state drives in that case. The difference between the V1 and the V2 is this option, the access tiers, hot, cool, and archive. There is no option for that in the general purpose, but in the version 2, you have an option to pick from hot, cool, or archive, and this means for which purpose you're going to use or you're planning to use this storage account. This will affect the price that you are paying for this, because when you pick the hot, you are telling Azure that you are going to use the information that you host in that specific storage account to be accessed frequently. So there is a price for reads and writes and accessing frequently to the information. And when you pick the cool, you are telling Azure that you are not going to use so frequently. And when you pick the archive, you are not going to use, you're just using for archiving. You're just having some information, documents, or files, and you're going to put it there, but maybe you have a policy that you need to archive that information from a year or for 2-3 years or more. For that purpose, you are going to select the archive, and basically you are not going to move that. You can do that. You can move it, and you can frequently access, but if you pick an archive and you are going to frequently access that information, you are going to pay more for selecting selecting the correct one, that in this case will be the hot one. So that depends on your design, on your architecture, if you are going to use it frequently or not so frequently. When you pick the version 2, you are going to you just make sure that you are picking the right selection, because that can affect the price for you. The Geo-Replication comes with all the storage accounts. This is basically the protection that you are receiving. You are receiving an SLA for each of the 4 options. You always, when you deploy storage accounts, you need to pick an option. From the cheapest one or the least secure, or the one with you are receiving the minimum SLA, it's in this order: locally redundant first, some redundant then geo-redundant, and then read access geo-redundant. Also, this is from the cheapest to the most expensive. With the locally redundant, data is replicated to 3 different nodes within the same data center. With some redundant, data is replicated to 3 different data centers within the same region. So you are receiving more protection here, because in the event of the same data center goes down, then your information will not be available in this case. But if you pick the some redundant, a single data center failure will not affect because you have 3 different copies in data centers in the same region. But in the event that the whole region goes down and all its data centers, then your information in some redundant will not be available. But if you pick the geo-redundant, the data is replicated to 3 different nodes in a different region. So in this case, you are more protected in geo-redundant than the zone redundant, because in the zone it is in the same zone, different data centers, but in the same zone. In the geo-redundant, it's different regions, so you have 3 copies in one region and 3 another copies into a different region. So the possibility to be down in 2 different regions at the same time, it's very minimal. So that is why you are paying more for this, and you are receiving more SLA for that. And the read access, the difference from these two, you're receiving the same SLA, but the difference between these two is that in the second location, you always have read access, so you can access that information, but you can't write. You just have read access. For security accessing storage data, you will receive always keys, storage keys for your storage account. Let me just quickly move into the storage to the Azure portal to show you how to create a storage account very quickly. Here in the vertical menu, we can scroll down and we can take a look at the storage account resource. Here I already have 2 storage accounts. We are going to use the webinar storage account. But if you want to create a new one, you can just click it and you will find very similar options than when we create a web application instance. We just need to name it, select a location, select the performance, select the account kind, and the options that we already saw. In the replication option, it is mandatory. We need to pick one, and depending on your selection, the access tier default here, cool or hot or something like that. Selecting the resource group and all that stuff. Because we don't want to lose some time on that, I already have one. So let's say that we configure all the settings and we deploy a storage account. When we click on the overview, we can see the 4 main services: blobs, files, tables, and queues. Those services are isolated from the others, as I told you before. So if I click on blobs, you can see that here you can create multiple containers. Instead of managing like in a file structure, instead of managing files, folders, and inside the folder files, talking about the blobs, we are managing containers definition. There is just one level of containers. That means that you cannot create a container inside another one. You just have this level, so you can create as many containers as you want, but at this level. So here I can create multiple containers and I can name it, and I can choose which type of blob I'm trying to use, either if it is for hosting BHD disk, it is for hosting some files, images, videos, for media files, or maybe just for logging purposes. And when you click on create a container, you are going to pick that options from there. In my case, I already have a 1 container, and that container contains like a multiple images. This files that we can see here represents some images there, and we can configure permissions to the file level for the blobs. For example, the SAS are for share access signatures, and the share access signatures are like the way that we can delegate permissions to other users. And we can configure granular permissions, like for example just read, create, write, or delete. If we are the storage administrators in our Azure subscription, and if we want to delegate access to multiple users or just another colleague in our organization, we can use an SAS. And in this case, because I'm accessing a single file, that is a GPG or an image, I'm just delegating the access to that single image, but you can just delegate the access to the entire blob. So if you have this blob to multiple content on it, you can generate an SAS for a single blob and if that person has the access to the, or has the SAS key to that, that person can only access that. Or you can create a SAS. If we scroll these options under settings, share access signature, to the entire storage account. But because remember that with a single storage account we can manage the 4 main services, here we can configure the granularity up to the storage account level. So if I want to delegate access just to blobs, I just deselect the other services. Or maybe if I want to delegate access to just to blob and files, I can select the blob and files. Or maybe all of them, I can just select all of them. You can configure, you need to configure a start an expiration date. So if that person possesses the SAS key and it's not complying with the start and expiration date, then that person can retrieve the content of your storage account. Also, you can combine that with like a network permission or firewall permission. If you know the public IP address for that person, or maybe if it's another person inside your organization, maybe you know the IP addresses that you are managing internally. So you can configure here a single public IP address, or maybe multiple ones, or maybe a range. And that person needs to be inside that IP address scope to be able to access the content. If that person possesses the SAS keys, and if that person goes out from your organization facilities or try to access from his home, and maybe he should be able to use a different public IP address. If that public IP address doesn't match with the ones that you configure here, then that person can access the content there. So that is the granularity that you can configure there using these storage accounts. Now, let's say that we will create a storage account, storage tables. So the table storage is for store structured NoSQL data in the cloud. We can store user information, device information, metadata for your service. This is a schema-less entities with rows with strong consistency for flexible structured storage. Dynamic load balancing of table regions based on load, no limits on number of table rows or table size. And properties of a particular entity are implemented as a collection of key value pairs there. This is basically how the storage tables, you can create a storage account that, let's say that this is the one that we just have, the webinar SA, for example. And here we can create multiple tables at this level. And inside the tables, we can just have multiple entities there, arranged for row partitions and the key value pairs. Like for example, this is an example of a game scores here. I have a demo there, but because of the lack of time, I don't have the time to show you the demonstration, because it will take more than 10 minutes and we are very limited on time. But here we can see that for a single table name, you can insert multiple entities, and you can create or combine your services with your web applications, for example, with your solutions. The way that you are going to use to access or to link your applications with your storage, it's using the access keys. Under settings, if we click on access keys, we can see the storage account name, that in some cases we need to use this storage account name, and this is the keys, and this keys has all permissions, but you are going to use this with your solutions, or maybe in some cases you are going to use the connection strings. Here, for example, I have some demos. For example, let me take a look at to make some integration with a table storage. I can open this table 2 solution that I just created, and let's take a quick view of how I can link my storage account with this small, very simple application. And for example, here I have the storage account name that I declare in my solution. So it's webinar SA. So here I need to just provide the storage account key for my storage account. So I can get that information from here. You can just click in this little button to click to copy, or and for the key you can use the two keys at the same time. You can use key 1 or key 2. This is because you have the options to regenerate the keys. When you are suspicious that your key is compromised, that maybe someone possessed the key, for security you can regenerate, and that will delete the old key. So if that is your case, first would be a good idea to just replace all your solutions that you already have linked with the key 1, replace it first with the key 2. So once that you do that, and to avoid that your applications stop working to your storage account, you can just replace first with the second key, and now that you know that you replace all the values from the keys, then you can and you release your key 1, you can click on regenerate, and that will regenerate the key number 1, and now you can start using the key 1. And you are deleting the key 1 if you are suspecting that your key 1 is suspicious. That is for security. So in my case, I'm using the key number 1 here. And here, if I just try to run this little application, this will try to automatically create a table in my storage account called webinar SA, a table called scores, and it's going to try to insert these entities. One entity will be for the name of the game, that in this case, let's say that it's a snake game, and this will be the usernames. We have usernames here, and this will represent the top score for each of the users. So let's try to quickly try to run that, and we should be able to see that this local application that I have in my computer, it's trying to first link to this storage account, that it's the storage account that I have in my subscription, using this storage key for permissions, and create a new table called scores and insert all these entities to that score. As I use this for inserting, you can update, delete, or modify, or something like that. So now we can take a look at the content of this table storage. If I scroll down, I can see under the tables, and now I can see the new table here, and I can see the URL. Remember that we are receiving an endpoint per storage service, and inside this I should be able to see the entities, but I can't use the Azure portal to do that. But I can use the same Visual Studio, because remember that there is some integration. I can just try to get the access of my storage account. In this case, I can click on my webinar or expand my webinar SA, and I can expand the table service, and I can see the scores table. So I can click on open, and I should be able to see the entities that we insert using that sample application there. The partition key will be the snake, the row key will be the name of the user. This is a timestamp that it's inserted automatically. And this is the top score that we just it's already declared in the program. So the way that we are going to work with the multiple services are going to be very similar. For the queues, for example, for passing messages between applications, there is very similar approach. You can use the storage key, the storage account name, and the storage key or the connection string to create the queues and for sending messages between applications there. For file services, the purpose for file service is to like apply something like a file share scenario, like a lift and shift. If you're already managing a file share in your on-prem, then you can move all the content to a file share in the cloud. And in that case, we can just move all the content here, or you can start creating a file share. It's like creating a folder, file share 1 for example. Here I can apply a quota like a 1 gigabyte for example, and I'm creating my file share. Now that I have my file share here, I can click on connect, and I will receive some instructions here like using a PowerShell command or using a net use that I can just quickly copy from here, and I can use the command prompt and I can paste it, and you can see the content of that specific command. It is using the net use to try to map the drive in my computer, but it's going to point it to my webinar SA storage account, to the file service. Remember that there is a single endpoint for a service, in this case to just file.core.windows.net, then the name of the share that I just create, file share 1, and this is using the credentials, Azure for the user, Azure for the domain, and webinar SA for the user. It is actually the name of the storage account, and this is actually one of the keys. That should be the key number 1. It is like the password. So if I try to run that, this should be map the C drive in my computer, and I should be able to use my file explorer to map or to see the content of my storage account using the file share there. In this case, in some cases, because of the firewalls or something like that, it's not working, but it's trying to map that. And if we receive a message here that we successfully connect to that, I should be able to see it in my computer that I already have mapped that file share there. Okay, so basically we run out of time, guys. Is there an upload download size limit? You're talking about the file service? Yes. Okay. The upload download size limit, depending on the quota that you apply for your file service. So you cannot, if you apply like a 1 gigabyte, you cannot upload more than 1 gigabyte file, and also and the limitation that you will have is your internet connection. So if you want to download that content from a file share that it's more than 1 gigabyte, or depending on the quota that you apply, then the time that will take for download that content, that will be, but there's the only limitation that you will find there. And also you have the limitation of the maximum amount of storage that you have for a single storage account. Remember that when you pick the storage account, the general purpose, you have the 4 services, and maybe if you are using the blobs, or you are using the tables and the queues and the files at the same time, then if you create a file share and you want to move all the 500 terabytes, you can't do that because you are using the other services, and the other services is taking some amount of the maximum space for that. But you can create a single storage account without using the other services and just using the files, and you have only a single storage account for your file service, and you have that maximum amount of space, the 500 terabytes, for a single file service. Also, you can combine a file share, because remember, when you are using the file share, you are accessing the Azure cloud to retrieving the content from there. So imagine that you are into an organization that all your users are using the file shares. Imagine that all of the users are trying to get the content from the cloud at the same time. So you have a bottleneck there. So if you are experiencing that, if you are in that specific environment, there is another approach that you can use in a combination with the file share that is called the Azure File Sync. In that case, you are going to configure a file sync agent into a specific service, into a specific server, and that server will cache the content of your storage account. So only your storage account and your on-prem server is going to synchronize the data, and then your local users inside your organization is going to use your LAN to access the content of your file server. But the agent sync and your storage account are the ones, or are the responsible ones, to synchronize the information there. So you can quickly access using the LAN speeds without everybody access or using the internet to access the cloud content, and it's accessing locally to your local on-prem server, and the storage account in your subscription or in your Azure cloud is going to synchronize with your on-prem server. So that would be another approach if you are in that specific environment. Or maybe if you are just a startup and if you have just a few users, then you can just go directly from the file share, and just your few users can access simultaneously at the same file share. And there should be a problem because of the bottleneck of something like that. Well, guys, we run out of time. It is a good time to more questions if you already have. Uh, you can open the mics or you can type it into the chat and I can answer those questions. Unfortunately, we have more topics that we should cover, but because of the lack of time, uh, we can't continue with that. But I encourage you to, there is multiple sessions if you go to the directionstraining.com page, and if you select the courses, for example, in this case, if you're interested into the Azure topic, you can click under the courses, you can click on the Azure topic, and that will open for you entire courses. In some cases are 1 day, 7 to 8 hours of content, 2 days or maybe 5 days, an entire week with more content. Or if you scroll down, you will see the upcoming events like this one. For example, there is another event on Thursday 14, Build Your Cloud Your Way, Azure Fundamentals, when we are going to cover, there is another 1 hour content that we are going to cover more the Azure Fundamentals, that maybe we can cover virtual machines, more of the web applications, more of the storage too. And you can click on View All Events and you will see a calendar with when you can see more upcoming events that you can sign in for that. Uh, and I would like to thank you so much for your attention, guys, and I'm going to pass the voice to Shannon. Shannon, do you want to share some, do you want to speak with?
Yeah, of course. Thank you everyone for joining us. We really appreciate it. We appreciate all your input. And I did see that someone suggested something they would like to see in the future for webinars was more of the basics of Azure. So I just wanted to let you know that we do actually on Thursday have a more fundamental version of this session. So you can go ahead and attend that as well, and it should be more of the basic level. Other than that, if you have any other questions right now, we did open up the mic, so feel free to ask away. Thank you.